kind of marred me, and I've not been a Rotarian since, I hate to say it. Anyway, I appreciated all of the comments from Skeet and also from Susan, whom I've known for a long time, when she, and I told her that she had a quote from Kenny Leon, who is a famous Broadway, does a lot of theater, and I just happened to be on an elevator with him after the Tony Awards in New York, so ironic that she chose the great thing, and the fact that TV is furniture I'm glad she read that, because I know that is something that is near and dear to her. Today I just want to kind of chat with you about where we have been since the pandemic hit and where we are today, and share with you a little bit of how we got through it and what the future looks like. So ironically, we were scheduled to have a Broadway show in March of 2020. And the show was My Fair Lady. It was a touring show, and it was supposed to open on March 17th. And on March 10th, 1 week before that, I had a staff member say, well, I'm hearing about this coronavirus, and do you think that will affect our production? And I said, absolutely not. No. And 4 days later, we postponed that production, which will finally play in August of this year. So we closed our doors on March 16th of 2020, and I remember we gathered the staff together because we were going to go work from home, and we didn't know if that was going to be for a month or 2 months or what. But I did say to the staff, just think about what it'll be like when we welcome guests back. It'll be a magical moment. We didn't know that that would be 18 months later. And so in the interim time, we had to reduce our staff. We reduced all of our full-time, or our part-time people. Our full-time staff went to reduced pay, and we had to lay off some people because we had zero earned revenue, and much of our revenue comes from ticket sales to performances. So the next few months that we, the 18 months, was a lot of moving dates, and that was what I was doing, which felt like it was a clerical job, because we were just moving touring dates around the calendar, and it was not fun at all. The thing also was true that even though there was reduced capacity for many organizations, the financial side of what we do would not allow us to do reduced capacity. We had to reopen at full capacity, and so that really cut down on our ability to operate. And the other thing we noticed too was just the economic hardship that this caused to a lot of the area businesses that rely on us. The restaurants that are bustling when we have a show at the Civic Center or the Temple Theater, or the hotels that we were just talking about Hamilton having about 70 people that tour with that and staying here for 3 weeks in hotels and Airbnbs, and what that impact was, because our annual economic impact is estimated around $40 million on the area. So what did we do during the pandemic? Like many of you, and we dislike this word pivoting, but that's what we did. We did pivot. Skeet mentioned that we have a series called Applause, which is where we bring students into the Civic Center and Temple Theater to see shows that are designed specifically for children. And if you ever see dozens of buses around the Civic Center, it is likely that a performance in that series. Well, we couldn't do those, so we switched to a virtual Applause series, which meant that we could live stream shows for children. We did this for free, and we had about 80,000 households that took advantage of these programs. This one, there's a slide here, I don't know if you can see it, but this was a program that we put together, and it was one of our people, Sarah Perez, put this together. It was called a theater in a box. So The kids got a box in the mail before this, and then they used the things that were in this to build a small theater, and it was so creative and so cool. But it was one of those things that we did. Another thing that we did was we switched our summer camps to virtual, meaning that one of the good side benefits was that for our Broadway intensive camp, we were able to have Tony Award winning actors and actresses teaching via Zoom from New York, because they were sitting at home like everyone else, and so that was a big change for us. We did continue with our Iowa High School Musical Theater Awards, which I'll talk about in a second. Again, and we were able to connect our high school kids with Broadway professionals via Zoom. The big thing that we did also was we initiated some free outdoor programming. And to that end, we hosted 5 free engagements of national and international shows that we actually took out to parks and amphitheaters around the metro area. So that meant we had 46 performances in various parks, playing to almost 10,000 people, and doing shows for the first time in cities outside of Des Moines, so West Des Moines, Urbandale, Johnston, Ankeny, and Altoona, which was terrific, and we will be continuing that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So, how did we get through all of this? The first thing I want to say is that I'm sure I've said this before, and I'm sure that any of you that work for not-for-profits know this. Des Moines is a very generous city, and so we had a huge number of our donors that stepped up and continued to support us. And we had 13 donors that made special gifts during that time, for which we were incredibly grateful. That was almost $1 million out of 13 gifts. And we did raise about $3 million during the shutdown, which is about half of what we would normally raise during that time. And that was able to sustain us through that time with all of the cuts that we had. One of the great things that happened to us and to many of the facilities around the state and around the country was the SBA had, as part of the CARES Act, a program called the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. And it was the first time that we've ever really received a significant grant from the federal government. Normally, if we get something, it's from the National Endowment for the Arts, and it's $10,000 or $20,000. This was a maximum of $10 million, and we were granted the max. We were given, between payroll protection and the SVOG, we received $10 million, which is less than we would normally earn during that 18-month period. But what it did was it changed the complexion of how we looked at the future. The fact that we had money in the bank and that we could continue to put money into the physical facilities, which is very, very important to us, because this month marks the, to do the math, the 44th year of the Civic Center, which opened in 1979. So the building is still very old. Is getting older, but it is still in great shape because we have spent so much money on that building, which is really, really important. I'm sorry, we're in our 44th year. 43 years was the anniversary that we just are celebrating this month. We also were able to retain our season ticket holders. So the season that we had just announced in 2020 was not going to happen. We gave season ticket holders the option of either getting a refund or hanging on to their tickets for when we would reopen. 95.5% of our season tickets holders, of 14,000 season ticket holders, held on to their seats, which was really, really tremendous. And because of the SVOG and because of the money that we raised, we were able to rehire and have filled most of our positions that were laid off during that time. So where are we today? We returned to performances starting in September of 2022. The first ticketed performance we had was the Des Moines Symphony in September, which has been our longtime tenant and partner. And our first Broadway series show was The Band's Visit, a Tony Award winning show in October. We have now, since resuming operations, we've done a total of 206 performances, and over 200,000 people have attended since we reopened. So it's great to be back. Skeet mentioned Hamilton, and that was at the beginning of this past month, and we completed our second engagement of Hamilton. I've bragged about this quietly for a number of times. The first time we did it in 2018, we were the 18th city in the world to present Hamilton. Way ahead of other cities in the area. Minneapolis and Omaha had to wait until after we did it. Not that we compete with them. We are continuing to invest in Broadway, and this is something that we have been doing, I've shared with this club before, in that in order to have a good pipeline of shows that come our way, we invest in Broadway shows. And I am still the president of this consortium that Skeet mentioned in the intro. It's a consortium of Broadway presenters from around the country that we pool our money together to invest in Broadway shows, and as a result we become a co-producer of those shows. And so we won Tony Awards for these two shows. On the left is Company, that was the revival of the Stephen Sondheim musical that won for Best Revival of a Musical. On the right was the Lehman Trilogy, a fascinating play about the Lehman brothers going back from their immigrating to the United States and ultimately ending in the collapse of that company. But it is a fascinating show and won the Tony Award for Best Play. So we see the investing in shows, most of the time our investment is relatively small, $25,000 for our share of that, sometimes it's $50,000, but again, when you look at the amount of money that we spend on Broadway in a year, it's a small amount of money to kind of think of that as the R&D and the cultivating of new shows. One of the things that we did in the past few weeks was a new dance piece called Pieces of My Heart. About 4 years ago, I was introduced by a mutual friend to a choreographer from New York. Her name is Sonia Dawkins. She does work with Alvin Ailey Dance Company. She's done a lot of things in Seattle. And she had the rights to unpublished poems by the playwright August Wilson. And these were love poems that he had written to his wife. And so she told me, I have this idea of having dancers and a spoken word artist and an actor and musicians. And when the pandemic hit, then we started talking more and more about it. And so we funded a 3-week residency for 7 dancers and a spoken word artist, an actor, and 3 musicians to come to Des Moines from all over the country. And it culminated in 4 public performances of this new work that we hope will have a future with other dance companies around the world. She's actually investigating maybe taking this to London. She has some interest in a dance company in La Jolla in California. So it's really exciting to be at the forefront of something, and we were able to fund this because of the generosity of our donors and also of the grant from the federal government. The other thing that happened just last week was I mentioned the Iowa High School Musical Theater Awards. This is a program that we started 10 years ago. And at that point in time, we started very small. The idea was to recognize excellence in the high school musicals, because many high schools around the state and around the country perform musicals on their stage. It's a great melting pot where you, especially if you're in a small school where I grew up, there were about 70 in my graduating class. We would do a musical every 2 years and everybody got involved, which was terrific. So we started this program 10 years ago, and the idea was to send adjudicators in to provide feedback to the schools, constructive feedback, so that we could try to elevate the level of those performances. We started just with Central Iowa schools. The first year we had 8 schools involved. which culminated in a showcase at the Civic Center. This year we had 81 schools statewide participating. And it was the first time we were doing it live. Last year, we have a great partnership with Iowa PBS, who live streams this event. And last year we did all of the recording in the Civic Center, so schools came in and performed with no audience. This year there was an audience, and it was just a spectacular evening. And I want to thank two people that are in this room. Susan, first of all, was the person who raised the money for us to have the partnership with Iowa PBS, which there will be a highlights of this on Iowa PBS in July. Again, just a spectacular show. And a few years ago, Bruce Kelly, when he was with EMC, came to me and said, I'd love to see how we can make this EMC Presents the Iowa High School Musical Theater Awards, which is what it is today. So thank you, Bruce, for what you did to make that happen. I mentioned summer camps earlier. We're in week number 2 of 6 weeks of summer camps. And we do 2 types of camps. One is what we call our musical theater camps that start on a Monday, and they end on Friday with Monday we cast a show, kids have to learn the songs, and by Friday they're performing it on the stage of the Temple Theater. When we put these on sale, I think we can have 30 in each of these camps. We filled them up in about a day, and we have a waiting list of 200 students for those camps. So they're very, very popular. The other thing we do is a Broadway intensive camp where we bring in high school students, and again, we bring professionals from New York that have Broadway credits to come in and coach over the course of a week. And that also has a waiting list as well. Lastly, I mentioned outdoor programming, and we are going to begin this week, tomorrow night, correct?
Correct.
Yoga Palooza, which is yoga and palooza together. But this will be in 2 amphitheaters in the metro area. All the information on our website. And again, this was wildly popular last year, taking shows out into the parks and partnering with park departments, doing free programming that families can enjoy. So we really found last year that it was great to reach some underserved audiences by going into parks, and again, free and a lot of fun. So all of that information is on our website. I just want to say, to wrap up, it's great to see you all, and I know that many of you donate and come to shows, and I thank you so much. It's been great to be back. We do have on your table this magazine, which is called Q. This is something we do once a year, and Jonathan Brendamule, who is with me today, is the editor of this, and it's a fabulous publication to be able to share with you some of the things you don't know about with Des Moines Performing Arts. And just to point out to you what this is on the front, you see these actors that are dressed as ants. And that was the name of the show. It was called Ants. It was a theater company from Australia that put this together. And there was no spoken word whatsoever. They had these crumbs, that were actually canvas bags that were stuffed with newspapers. And the idea was the ants would come out and they would move these crumbs from one place of the park to another. And little kids would figure this out really quickly and then go and help the ants to move these crumbs. It's so hard to describe, but it was so cool to see this, especially little kids, because they just totally got into helping the ants move these crumbs. So the same company is going to be here this year with a new show called Bees, which I don't know what they're doing, but it'll be really cool. You can find that on our website. But you are welcome to take this with you. We hope you will, because it has some great information about what we are doing behind the scenes. With that, I would be happy to answer any question, well, almost any questions. Steve.
Jeff, I have a question.
it seems like there was a very critical turning point in Des Moines Performing Arts and your mission and your role. It was in the mid-90s, shortly after you got here, and I think it was Phantom.
Mm-hmm.
Could you go through that story?
Sure. So Skeet asked the question about a turning point in our organization's history, the Phantom of the Opera. And that is absolutely true. So prior to so the building opened in 1979. And prior to that, most of the Broadway shows that were coming here were running for anywhere from 1 performance to 8 performances. Annie had a couple of multi-week engagements that were 2-week runs. But Broadway was still very much in flux at that time, and we did not have the Broadway series like we do now where you buy a season ticket package. We did not have that. And probably the greatest audience development tool for touring Broadway was the production of the Andrew Lloyd Webber's The Phantom of the Opera. And it was such a juggernaut at that point in time. It was the biggest show on the road. It required a lot of work to put it into the theater. And when we announced the show coming here, we said it's going to be here for 4 weeks. And to put that in perspective, in a 1-week engagement of a Broadway show, we have 8 performances from Tuesday through Sunday. And that's about 21,000 seats to sell. So if you do the math, 4 weeks of Phantom was 84,000 tickets to sell, which is a lot. And I even had some people, because I was relatively new when we announced this, and they were like, boy, I just don't think this is going to work, and hope you have a backup for your job, because and later I said, well, you know what, you were right, 4 weeks didn't work. We added a 5th week, and so we ended up playing for 5 weeks, and over 100,000 people saw that show in the first engagement. And it really proved to me that there was a market here. And what was really important about that show was it was an exact duplicate of the Broadway show. There was nothing that was scrimped on that at all. One of my favorite stories from that engagement in 1997 was there used to be 2 guys in town that had a business where they worked on, or they built costumes for Renaissance fairs. And they did this all over the country. This was way before the internet was, you could just order stuff on the internet, but they would get calls from all over the country, to build costumes. Somehow the head wardrobe person found these guys and contacted them and said, would you be willing to do some maintenance on the costumes, because we're constantly looking for craftspeople that know how to do this. So they would come in every day and work 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week in our basement. And about the 2nd week, I knew these guys, and I went down and I said, so what's it like? And one of them looked at me and said, this is the most unbelievable thing. He said, the fabrics that we're using and the threads that we're using, these are the finest in the world. I mean, this is the highest quality stuff we've ever done. And many of these costumes are using real gold and thread. The point I'm trying to make is that there was no scrimping on the tour of the Phantom of the Opera. The costumes cost tens of thousands of dollars each. And every time you have an understudy has to have their own costumes. So the dress that Carlotta wears in one of the opera scenes, it's $40,000 or $50,000. They have 3 of them because there's 2 understudies and the main person. So but the quality of that production really set the bar and said to us, we can do this. And we created the Willis Broadway series after that. So thank you for asking that.
Yes. Funny enough, I was a senior in high school, and I remember how big of a deal Phantom was in Des Moines. I just remember hearing about it. But I know this is like choosing between your children, but what's your favorite production you put on at the time?
The question was, what's the favorite production that we put on? Any other questions? I really love the productions that kind of stretch the show, stretch the audience a little bit, and sometimes those are shows that will have strong language or adult, very adult themes, and every time the audience goes along for the ride, I think about a play, August Osage County, that won the Tony Award, and we brought it was 3.5 hours, but it was riveting, and 3.5 hours with 2 intermissions, I think. I love bringing those shows here. Spring Awakening was a big hit. That was about 10 years ago that we did that. Some of the original cast performed on the Tony Awards just a week and a half ago. So I love those kind of shows that really connect with the audience, and it's a surprise to people that they walk out and say, wow. Thank you. Yes?
Jeff, how do we compare, or I guess I'm curious what your benchmarking is like when you compare ourselves to other performing arts organizations of similar size, similar markets. How do we compare, and especially in the last 2 years, how have we fared maybe compared to many of our peers?
Yeah, so the question was, how do we compare to other performing arts centers, and how do we benchmark that? You know, it's a little hard to do sometimes because so many of us have different missions and different things that we do. A fair amount of our programming requires subsidy, meaning, like for instance, our dance series, we can't possibly sell enough tickets to cover the cost of presenting a dance company because it's very labor intensive, and so we subsidize that heavily. Really just about every series we do requires some level of subsidy except the Willis Broadway series. I think the best way to answer that is to say that we are able to cover all of our costs, try to pay our people really decent wages, and then spend a lot of money on the facility to make sure that it's remaining in great condition. And I think that's the best way that I can benchmark it. And I believe we do that, and that makes me very proud. Yeah. Ooh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about investing in certain Broadway shows as a group. How does that decision-making process go on? How do you all decide, hey, this is a great idea? Can you walk through that a little bit?
Yeah, so the question is about the shows that we invest in, and how do we decide that? First of all, if you are looking to make money, do not invest in a Broadway show. I just want to be clear, because about a huge percentage of them never recoup their initial investment. A very huge percentage of them. However, if you invest in the right show and it's a big hit, you can make a lot of money off it. We've been investing since 2001, so 21 years we've been doing it, and we've recouped through the amount of money that you get back. We've gotten back about 80% of what we've invested, which we think is great because, again, it's a research and development piece. The decisions, typically, I make them for our organization, but we're part of this consortium that has an investment committee that then brings to our members the opportunity, and so it's kind of vetted through me. I'm part of that committee as well. Typically, we like to work with the same producers again, so if we've had a good experience, we want them to have the same values that we do, and so that's mainly is trying to kind of, again, it makes a huge difference too, because the producers, the fact that we have an investment changes our relationship because we become an investor rather than just a consumer of it. So, good question. You had a question? Same question. Same question? Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Jeff. Quick question about how you work with other entities, such as the Des Moines Symphony, these other partnerships that you have. Could you talk a little bit about how those developed and what your role is with those?
Sure.
And maybe what the role going forward might be with future opportunities?
Yes, so the question Mark had is about working with other community organizations, and the Civic Center, as many of you know, was built for a lot of purposes, but one of the main purposes was to have a permanent home for the Des Moines Symphony. And that relationship has it's a tremendous relationship. For years, the offices for the Symphony were in our building, and then as our staff was growing and the Symphony's staff was growing, they eventually moved over to the Temple for Performing Arts. But the fact that we do 7 pairs of concerts each year with the Symphony, they are a tenant, and so they are we don't get involved with what they are programming, and so what we do is provide the services to them, and they pay us for that. We do have one collaboration we do every year with them, which is where one of their Pops concerts, we select a Broadway artist to come to Des Moines and perform with the symphony, which has been one of our most popular things that we've done. We have Bernadette Peters is our next guest that's coming in September. We've had Leslie Odom Jr. and Audra McDonald and Brian Stokes Mitchell and Sutton Foster, so some of the top Broadway performers. And it was a win-win for us because when we started that series, it elevated, because their cost is way higher than what the symphony would normally pay for a soloist. So the fact that we were able to kind of work together made that very easy. We also have relationships with the ballet, and also Des Moines Metro Opera just opened their 50th season in our building, which with this spectacular production of The Magic Flute that I'm sure many of you saw, which required 3 weeks of rehearsal in the main hall, which was a lot of time that we, in our normal busy time of the year. Again, those are relationships where it is a rental, so unless we have some specific relationship, we just are providing all the services, all of the labor, the facilities. But I think what's really interesting is the relationship we have with 3 theater companies here in Des Moines that use the Stoner Theater, which is our black box theater in the Civic Center, Pyramid Theater Company, and the Iowa Stage and Young Artists Theater all use that space. And again, we're renting that space to them, but we do it kind of on a flat fee basis, which is great because they can more easily do their budgets, and it's, you know, we know what it's going to cost for them to do that. There's not a lot of money in renting a 200-seat theater, but it's a great service to those. So we really value the work that we do with our local tenants and try to work to make sure that we have the best equipment for them to use. One other thing we did a few years ago, the Symphony and our organization raised the money jointly to do a new orchestra shell, which is the enclosure that the symphony plays in on our stage. And that was a big project to raise that together. Any other questions? Ooh, 5 minutes before 1, that's pretty good. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jeff, for your presentation and really for making Des Moines take on an altogether richer experience for all of us. We really appreciate it. As a token of appreciation, we're donating a book in your honor to the Des Moines Public Library Foundation's Rotary Rosie Reader Van. How's that? So, inside joke, we all trip on that. This van is really dear to us. Our club's foundation donated $40,000 for the purchase of the van, and it does good work all across the city. So now, a quick look at our upcoming meetings. As always, I challenge those of you who are members of the Rotary Club of Des Moines to think about who you could bring to our meetings. We're always looking to grow our club and the vitality of our club, and the best way to do that is through you. So, June 30th, even though it feels like the gavel has passed, it's official next week. So, next week is the gavel passing. We're also introducing a new member, so that's always fun. We'll also be awarding our annual Rotarian Awards. So lots of good reasons to be here. And finally, we also have a great program on the slate. We will be hearing from the Iowa Land Trust. So July 7th, no meeting in honor of Independence Day. We'll be taking that week off. And last, July 14th, Christine House from the Greater Des Moines Community Foundation will be here to bring us up to speed on what is going on in that organization. So good to have all of you. Thank you for being here. And we are adjourned.